What would have happened if the State of Israel had been established on an island? Can you imagine if the Jews had been tasked with building a new nation in the Arctic? Well, today we're going to tell you about the incredible and crazy brainstorming that took place before Israel was established where it is today. First of all, we have to remind you of something quite important. Why did the Jews need to settle somewhere? The quick answer to this is called Zionism. Many of you have probably heard this word, and in short, Zionism is a nationalist ideology invented by Theodor Herzl whose purpose is the free self-determination of the Jewish people. Hello to all the community of Finance for All, welcome to another video. Throughout history, many Hebrews left Palestine, where they were historically from, and spread out to many places around the world. On many occasions, this Jewish diaspora ended up becoming a target of persecution, and things got very, very tense for them. At the end of the 19th century, with the rise of nationalism, Mr. Herzl saw that the situation could get very complicated for his people, so he developed a plan to contain antisemitism and, in the process, create a country from scratch. After his death, this plan was continued by his successors and eventually culminated in what became known as the Balfour Declaration, a pact with the British published in 1917 in which they committed to finding a home for the Jewish people. And what were the British interests in this pact? Well, it was very convenient for them to have a guaranteed ally in the strategic location they were going to cede, something that the Americans also benefited from later on, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. It turns out that in 1903, Joseph Chamberlain, father of the famous British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, made a very particular proposal to Theodor Herzl. This proposal involved offering a territory in what is now Kenya as a possible Jewish homeland. It was perfect for the British because it was an area that needed European settlers for its maintenance, and there were few white citizens left in that part of the empire. Of course, we are talking about a terrible part of colonial history. This plan, which was called the Ugandan Plan, even though it had nothing to do with Uganda, caused quite a stir when it was presented to the Jewish community and ended up being rejected by territorial Zionists, who saw that this area was a bit far from Sinai, their preferred location. Interestingly, the area of Kenya that Chamberlain offered to the Zionists was Eldoret, a very interesting place due to its genetic component. It's from there that many super athletes and great Kenyan runners come. Another place that crossed Theodor Herzl's mind and that he actually describes in his book, Der Judenstaat, as one of the richest places on earth was Argentina. And yes, the Bible certainly doesn't mention the land of Milanesas in its texts, but in the late 19th century, many Jews took refuge there, specifically in Santa Fe. The Jewish community grew enormously, and Zionism saw in Argentina a place where European antisemitism had not yet taken root. Of course, if Kenya was far from the lands of the book, Argentina was much further away, so the idea didn't catch on either. Still, today, Argentina is the fifth country with the most Jews in the world and the one with the most Jews in Latin America. We've been talking about Jews and antisemitism for quite a while now, and we still haven't mentioned Hitler. Well, do you know who else were anti-Semites? The Bolsheviks. However, after burning down several synagogues and eliminating many rabbis, the Soviet Union, in its first decade of existence, decided to make amends for this and improve its relations with the Jews. In its time, the Soviet Union was the country with the most Jews in the world. The presence of Jews was particularly significant on the western border, in the southern areas of Ukraine and Crimea. To gain control of these areas, the Soviets promoted Jews and fought against antisemitism, which led several thousand Soviet Jews, and even foreigners, to move to a new socialist Jewish homeland. This was known as the Birobidzhan Exodus, named after the city itself. In fact, in 1934, the Soviet Union created an autonomous Jewish oblast with its capital precisely in Birobidzhan and established Yiddish as the official language. Of course, things went wrong. Soviet atheism could not tolerate a culture so closely tied to religion, and Stalin, another anti-Semite, even less so. In his purges, he eliminated much of the Jewish elite of Birobidzhan, and the Soviet option was completely blocked. Each place is more outlandish than the last, right? Well, now we move on to the Arctic. 2 weeks after Kristallnacht, with all the anti-Semitic tension running high, the Interior Secretary of the Roosevelt administration saw things very clearly. Back then, Alaska was not a state of the United States but rather an American territory. Thanks to being a territory, Alaska was allowed to exceed the legally imposed immigration quota. On the other hand, the United States would greatly benefit from the labor force to exploit the natural resources of such an inhospitable territory with such a sparse population. Of course, all of this remained on the drawing board. It was not even a formal proposal to Zionist groups, as it was rejected in the first instance by the governor of Alaska. Things get even more interesting with another of the places we're going to talk about today, Madagascar. This idea didn't originate from the Jews but rather from antisemitism and Nazi Germany. Since the migration of Jews to countries bordering Germany was a rather large problem just before World War II, the French Foreign Minister, Georges Bonnet, and the German Joachim von Ribbentrop discussed the idea of a resettlement. With the final solution, the Nazis went so far as to approve a plan in which France was forced to cede Madagascar to Germany to turn it into a kind of concentration island, a complete police state for the Jews, directly controlled by the SS. If that already seemed quite horrible, the fate of the Jews took a much worse turn when the plan shifted from mass deportation to genocide. It's important to tell you that while all these proposals were being put on the table in the territories of what is today Palestine were controlled by the British Mandate, Jewish immigration to Palestine was growing year after year, something that became exponential after the end of World War II. Thus, tens of thousands of Jews took their suitcases to the true, promised land, which had already been described in the Torah, a land that, on the other hand, was inhabited by a population with its own distinct culture and religion. Another hypothetical island destination proposed for the Jewish people was Cyprus. This island was one of the few destinations that had a significant proximity to the region of Palestine. The problem with Cyprus was that, for Zionist Jews, it was a stepping stone to get to the Mediterranean Levant. After World War II, the British had to severely restrict Jewish immigration to Palestine. So, just to show you how things were in Cyprus, it turns out that between 1946 and 1949, around 50,000 Jews were detained by the British in concentration camps, waiting for their chance to reach Palestine. Other places that were proposed for a Jewish state included Kimberley in Australia, East Prussia, and British Guiana. Imagine what it would have been like if Israel had ended up in any of the places we've mentioned. In conclusion, we can say that from the very beginning, Zionism always knew where it wanted to end up. No matter how many proposals were considered, how many obelisks were created, or how many resources there were in any other region, the only place where Zionist Jews wanted to settle was in the Palestinian territories. In 1947, the UN approved the partition plan that recommended the creation of two independent states, one Jewish and one Arab, to resolve the tensions between the two ethno-cultural groups. When the British Mandate expired on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion became the first Prime Minister of the newly independent State of Israel. Immediately afterward, Arab forces invaded the country. Following Israel's victory, many Arabs were forced to leave their country in what is known as the First Nakba. From that moment on, a war began that still endures today. The questions we ask ourselves are, would everything have been different if the international community had not accepted the State of Israel? What would have happened if the Jews had not been persecuted by Europeans? Do you think any of these alternative territories would have been a good idea? You can leave us your opinion in the comments.